Welcome to the mini-module Foundations of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, the essential components of a hypothesis statement. This mini-module is brought to you by Connecticut State Education Resource Center, or CERC, with funding from the Connecticut School Climate Transformation Grant. The U.S. Department of Education awarded Connecticut the grant in 2014, and CERC and the Connecticut State Department of Education subsequently undertook a statewide analysis of multi-tiered systems of support. This analysis attempted to identify strengths of implementation, as well as areas for improvement that could be targeted through improved training and technical assistance. This module will provide foundational information through which schools can improve implementation. In order to conduct the analysis of multi-tiered systems, the Connecticut State Department of Education selected the Tiered Fidelity Inventory as the instrument. The Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or TFI, was developed as part of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs National Technical Assistance Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. The TFI measures how school personnel are applying the core features of school-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports. It is intended to provide a valid, reliable, and efficient measure over the 3 tiers of intervention. During the course of analysis, 175 facilitated sessions were held in schools across Connecticut, where school teams analyzed their process. Several common themes emerged from the aggregate data from items on the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. We would like to acknowledge that content and best practices were gleaned from the tool as well as resources from pbis.org and nepbis.org websites. We also want to acknowledge resources from Portland State University's online training about functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. The goal of this mini-module is to understand the critical components of a hypothesis statement within a behavioral support plan. A behavioral support plan is a comprehensive plan implemented by adults who are involved in a student's educational program. The plan is designed to provide intensive intervention to support behavioral change. The cornerstone of a behavioral support plan is the development of a hypothesis statement. Hypothesis statements have 3 critical components, including an operational description of the target behavior, identification of the context where the target behavior is most likely to occur, and the perceived motivation for the target behavior. These 3 components comprise the ABC model for behavior. As mentioned before, there are 3 critical components of a hypothesis statement. These 3 components create an ABC model for behavior. The ABC model is an approach that can be used to help people examine target behaviors, the triggers of those behaviors, and the impact of those behaviors. For example, if a student performs a certain behavior, then certain consequences that benefit the student may follow. Under the ABC model, forming a hypothesis statement is a key tool in the creation of behavioral support plans. The 3 components in the ABC model are A for antecedent, B for behavior, and C for consequence. The antecedent describes the context of when and where a target behavior is most likely to occur. The behavior is the operational description of the target behavior. This should be written with observable and measurable language, and the consequence is the change in environment that follows the target behavior. This often provides us insight into the perceived motivation for the target behavior, or the why. We will break down each of these components and how they come together to form a hypothesis statement. It is best practice to start with defining the target behavior, that is, a behavior that is preventing student success. This description must be operationalized, meaning it must be observable and measurable. The target behavior must be an action that can be seen, counted, or timed. The definition should be so clear that a person unfamiliar with the student could recognize the target behavior without any doubts. Once the target behavior is identified, teams consider, what is the frequency of the behavior? This is a count of how often we see the target behavior. What is the duration of the behavior? This is the length of time that behavior lasts. What is the intensity of the target behavior? What does the behavior look and sound like in different contexts and across settings? Prioritizing behaviors and defining each one separately is important, as they are not all triggered by the same things or serve the same function. To give better clarity, let's walk through an example of an operationally defined target behavior, talking out. The definition of talking out is any verbalization made by the student that was not initiated by the teacher and/or distracts others from the assigned tasks in the classroom. A complete definition should include examples and non-examples of the behavior to give a clear picture of the target behavior. A full definition allows for better data collection. To demonstrate, examples of talking out are answering a question directed to another student by the teacher, talking when the teacher is giving directions, or talking to peers during independent work time. Non-examples of talking out include answering a question that the teacher directed to the student, yelling to another student during recess, or talking with a peer during group work. The antecedent is anything that could be a trigger for the behavior to occur. It refers to the environment or preceding events of the targeted behavior being analyzed. The antecedent could be a question from a teacher, the presence of another person, or changes in the environment. Let's think about some self-reflective questions about where and when behavior occurs. What immediately precedes the target behaviors? When is the student most likely to engage in the target behaviors? Are there specific tasks, classes, contexts, peers, or adults when the behavior occurs more often? Under what conditions is the student least likely to present the target behaviors? Focusing on the where will assist in identifying the routines in which the target behavior is most likely. Some examples of where target behavior occurs are in math, gym, lunch, or recess. Focusing on the when will assist in identifying specific events or antecedents within a routine that trigger the target behavior. An example of this might be when a student is asked to read independently. When understanding behavior, we want to learn what function or purpose the target behavior is serving for the student. In other words, what is the benefit to the student? The defined target behavior is functional or serves a purpose. It is important to remember that behavior is a form of communication and meets a need. By understanding the function of a student's behavior, school staff can then understand how to intervene most effectively. Behavior theorists have broken function into two main categories: to obtain or get something, or escape or avoid something. There can be multiple things a student may be trying to obtain or avoid, such as sensory stimulation, social interactions with peers or adults, or tangible items or activities. The graphic you are seeing outlines the two functions of behavior and the various factors that may be contributing. Identifying the function of behavior helps us to prevent problem behavior, teach our students better ways to have their needs met, and ensure consistency across all environments. The last component of the contingency is the consequence. The consequence is an action or response that follows the behavior. The consequence is not necessarily a punishment or form of discipline, though it can be. Instead, it is the outcome or result that is reinforcing for the student. The outcome can often predict the function or benefit to the student for demonstrating the behavior. For example, a student wanders, that's the behavior, around the classroom during a challenging math assignment, that's the antecedent. Then the teacher allows the student to wander, that's the consequence, and the benefit to the student or the function of the behavior is avoiding the task. When discussing the consequence and function, the school team will want to think about what happens immediately after the target behavior. How are the adults and peers responding to the student's behavior? What is the student trying to convey or communicate through the target behavior? What do they perceive the student is trying to get or avoid when presenting or engaging in this target behavior? What may be reinforcing for the student? Let's reflect on the antecedent, target behavior, consequence, and perceived motivation within this example. Using a variety of data points, we can assess the situation. Based on classroom academic assessments, student C reads on grade level. In addition, the team reviews office discipline data and teacher observations. The team determined that the routine when the behavior occurs is during social studies class. This is based on multiple office discipline referrals during this time. The antecedent of when the behavior occurs is when student C is asked to read independently, even though student C has been assessed on grade level. The target behavior is when student C talks out and jokes with peers. The consequence is that peers laugh and talk to student C. The perceived motivation is that student C can access peer attention. The team has used the existing data to determine that the function of the behavior is peer attention and not task avoidance, since student C is capable of completing the reading task. The ABC model is now ready to form a hypothesis statement. In order to finalize the hypothesis statement, we use a pattern. Here's an example of how to frame it. When insert antecedent, the student insert target behavior, in order to insert perceived function. So, using our example, here's a complete hypothesis statement. In social studies, when asked to read independently, student C talks out by yelling at other students or talking to peers in order to access peer attention. Having this understanding, the school team can use this statement to determine the best prevention, teaching, and response techniques that will become a part of the behavioral plan. Thank you for participating in this mini-module and working to improve the quality of multi-tiered systems of support.